Major breaking news. I want to give you the official announcement. I have published my next book. I've referenced this in prior videos, but I want to talk about it today. Israel Disarmed, what the October 7th attacks on Israel teach Americans about the right to bear arms. Important lessons here. Let's talk about a few of them when we come back and see what you think. Let me know your comments below. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4-Box Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of course, the brand new book which we're talking about today, Israel Disarmed, what the October 7th attacks teach Americans about the right to bear arms. Okay folks, so this is my number 8th book, very important book on the Second Amendment. As you know, I like to teach people about things they may not naturally know. So I put together an extremely detailed book. A lot of it's a history, modern contemporary politics, of course. And basically I walk through, and my thesis is as follows, that on October 7, 2023, when Hamas engaged in their terrorist attack on Israel that took almost 1,200 Israeli lives and several hundred people were taken hostage, that one of the main problems was that the Israeli government's policy up to that point was to discourage individual Israeli citizens from possessing firearms. Heavy-duty gun control, worse in many respects than like New York City's here in the United States, made it hard to have anything more than 50 rounds in your home. You could only have pistols, no long guns, very difficult. And if you were in certain parts of Israel, again, not encouraging toward private armed citizens. A mistake that was made that I think the Israelis have now recognized they made that mistake on October 7th. And now they're encouraging people, although they're not going as far as I would go, but they are encouraging more and more people to arm themselves in private capacities, including what are known as alert squads, which is groups of individuals coming together in their communities, cities, towns, villages, kibbutzim, to effectively form a mini militia of volunteers to protect their towns from surprise attacks from the terrorists or others. And these are all positive developments. But I talk about how this is really too late. The Israelis made these mistakes. They should have done this earlier. And really the book, I would say there's like 5 or 6 general points I make in the book. And of course, a lot more details and a lot of history and citations. I think there's, I don't know, maybe 500 citations of resources. Pretty extensive. As you know, I try to document everything I do. So I laid it out in the book. But the first thing as I start off in the book, I call it the tale of 2 kibbutzim. One kibbutz, which is basically a kind of a commune farm area that people live voluntarily together as kind of a community. One kibbutz had guns and no one was taken hostage and no one was killed because they fought off the bad guys, the terrorist Hamas, the Hamas terrorists. The other kibbutz, unfortunately, did not have guns. They were disarmed and terrible things happened there, which is most unfortunate. And I detail the compare and contrast between the armed citizens in one kibbutz with the disarmed citizens in the other kibbutz there in Israel and the lessons to draw from that. Because remember, we always want to learn the lessons of the mistakes that other people make, because the most expensive teaching tools for us in our lives is to learn from our own mistakes. It's much better and cheaper and wiser to learn from the mistakes of others so that you don't make those same mistakes. So I talk about the tale of 2 kibbutzim right up front. Then I talk extensively about the history of the Jews and the history of Israel. And I specifically discuss how Israel forgot. Now, you know, after World War II and the Holocaust, where the Nazis killed, 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, there was a push, and there still is a push, to never forget. But I talk extensively about what exactly was it that we, as civilized humans, need to make sure we don't forget about what happened in the Holocaust. And I think there's many things to not forget. But to me, one of the main takeaways, if not the main takeaway, is to make sure that you and your fellow citizens and your community do not get disarmed. Because once you are disarmed, you are sitting ducks. You are vulnerable to all sorts of terrible predations by evil people that have evil designs on you and your life and your freedom. So one of the things I think that you should never forget is to don't be disarmed. And I talk about how Israel, in my view, forgot those lessons from World War II and what led up to the Holocaust, and they need to be reminded of that. And this book, I think, helps to do that and reminds all of us, not just Israelis and Jews, of the importance of armed citizens. Then I talk extensively about literally the millennia, right? The millennia of oppression the Jews have experienced for thousands of years. And one of the key aspects of that oppression that they've suffered is they are repeatedly and over again and throughout the world and throughout world history have been disarmed and disarmed and disarmed. And I talk extensively about how they have developed this sort of culture in some respects of not liking private gun ownership to the extent I think they should. And I talk extensively about how this occurred. Everything from that, if you want something to be kosher in terms of kosher meat, that meat cannot come from an animal that is hunted, for example. There's also a long history of Jews living in urban areas where hunting is not prevalent or popular, obviously, because it's an urban area, and among a whole host of other things I get into in extreme detail. Again, we want to learn this history of other people, so we make sure here in the United States we don't make a mistake, or we don't, we see bad things coming down the pike before it occurs. We always want to learn from history so we don't repeat the mistakes that others have made throughout history. A lot of important information there. Then I talk about the deadly costs of disarmament. And I really lay out in extreme detail all the terrible outcomes of being disarmed, both privately, socially, and whatnot. And I lay it out, not just the dangers of being disarmed in Israel, but all across the globe. We talk extensively about that in one of my chapters. Then, of course, I point out that indeed, don't think that these terrible, violent, evil things cannot happen here in the United States. I walk through extensively how it is possible that we could be invaded. And even if we're not invaded by the Red Army, let's say, we are certainly being invaded now by various terrorist illegal aliens who we don't know where they come from or what they intend. We certainly know from, for example, September 11th, 2001, that it didn't take that many really people that came into the United States with ill will toward us to do terrible damage, not just to the people that were killed on 9/11, the 3,000 Americans killed, but of course the damage to our civil society, including our freedoms, to the point where now we have to take shoes off at the airport in many instances. So terrible blow to our way of life thanks to 9/11 and 18 or so basically foreigners that came into the country. So there's a lot of bad things that can happen in the United States that we never want to forget about or learn from other problems occurring so it doesn't occur here. Then last but not least, I talk about the doomsday provision, which is the Second Amendment, to make sure that we have guns, make sure we're armed because bad things can happen. And don't say that our country cannot go crazy and terrible things cannot occur here. Anything is possible. Keep in mind that Germany Germany in the late 19th century, early 20th century was a fantastic country, very cultured. You had to speak German to get a PhD or a doctorate, for example. Very high-end, high culture place. And we know what happened with them in the 30s and the 40s. In the 20th century, very bad things occurred. So societies can go crazy, and we must never forget this. And then I talk about some important history. For example, I talk extensively about Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story and what he explained as a founder of the United States about the importance of an armed citizenry. I talk about how Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, who is famous for the Amistad decision from the movie that Steven Spielberg made, where Amistad was the name of the ship where the African slaves rebelled and took over the ship from Spanish captors and basically won their freedom thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision written by none other than, you got it, Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, who is a huge proponent of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. Here's a couple of things Joseph Story talked about, which I discuss extensively in the book Israel Disarmed. Justice Story wrote, "The natural defense of a free country against sudden foreign invasions, domestic insurrections, and domestic usurpations of power by rulers includes an armed citizenry. They stand as the natural defense. Beyond that," Justice Story wrote, "that the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of the liberties of the Republic. That's right. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story said, the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of the liberties of the Republic. And palladium of the Republic means to safeguard the Republic. And of course, we also know that James Madison, the author of the Constitution, had this to say about armed Americans. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, highlighted the need for armed citizens. In Federalist number 46, Madison pointed out an advantage Americans held over the people of almost every other nation. And what was it? Quote, the advantage of being armed, James Madison wrote. Other governments, Madison said, were afraid to trust the people with arms. Of course, historically here in the United States, we encourage Americans to have arms to protect our freedoms and our lives and our country and our communities from evil people who will do evil things to us if you let them. Never forget that the barbarians are always at the gate. The barbarians are always trying to come into the country. They're always there trying to take away what you've got. They're always there trying to take away our civilization and our freedoms and our wealth and our property and our lives and so on. The barbarians are always at the gate. Never forget that. The only thing that prevents them from coming in and taking over our country and taking all of our stuff and murdering us is we won't allow it. And one of the ways we won't allow it is with, of course, our military and with our armed citizens. And of course, I talk extensively about the scholarly work and the writings of a proponent of the Second Amendment, former federal judge Alex Kozinski, a Jewish man himself whose family emigrated to the United States from communist Romania. His family was in concentration camps during World War II, and he had a lot of views about the importance of armed citizens. I talk extensively about Alex Kozinski's experience and his discussions of the Second Amendment. Here's just a little taste of what I discuss when it comes to Judge Kozinski and the importance of armed citizens in my book, Israel Disarmed. Judge Kozinski wrote the following, quote, all too many of the other great tragedies of history, Stalin's atrocities, the killing fields of Cambodia, the Holocaust, to name but a few, were perpetrated by armed troops against unarmed populations. Many could well have been avoided or mitigated had the perpetrators known their intended victims were equipped with a rifle and 20 bullets apiece, as the Militia Act required here in the United States. Judge Kozinski went on, as I talk about in my book, Israel Disarmed, about how many who want to trample the Second Amendment have forgotten these bitter lessons of history. Judge Kozinski continued to write, quote, the prospect of tyranny may not grab the headlines the way vivid stories of gun crime routinely do, but few saw the Third Reich coming until it was too late. The Second Amendment is a doomsday provision, one designed for those exceptionally rare circumstances where all other rights have failed, where the government refuses to stand for re-election and silences those who protest, where courts have lost the courage to oppose or can find no one to enforce their decrees. Indeed, as I write about in my book, Israel Disarmed, Judge Kozinski said that such contingencies may seem improbable today, but he concluded with a warning we must never forget. Facing them unprepared is a mistake a free people get to make only once. Powerful language from Judge Alex Kozinski. This is the kind of material and sources that I've put in my book, Israel Disarmed, so that you can take a look at it and you can grab the best stuff and you can use it to defend our right to keep and bear arms, to teach your children and others about the importance of these critical issues. And by the way, I made this book a little bit shorter than my other books. It's got a whole lot of pages about sources and references and citations, of course, but I made this a little bit shorter so it should be even easier to read than some of my prior works, because I try to make this easy to understand and to read so that everyone appreciates the importance of the American Constitution, including our Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. Because if our government, if you can't trust Americans with guns, it means you can't trust Americans with a vote or anything else. And we must never lose our 4 boxes of American liberty: the cartridge box, which is the gun; the jury box, which is rule of law; the soap box, which is the First Amendment; and of course, we must never forget the ballot box, the right to vote. Okay, folks, there you have it. Make sure you check out my book, Israel Disarmed. We'll talk more about this in the future. Don't forget to follow me on X at 4 Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.